Hello, Endeavor here. So we're back with another Morgoth and Endeavor's classic movie stream, and tonight we're going to look at two classic movies. We're going to be looking at Mutiny on the Bounty and HMS Defiant. So before we get into the mainstream, I just want to make sure my audio is okay. Just put ones in the chat if I'm coming through loud and clear, if you can hear me well. Just make sure that everything is clear. Okay. So it sounds like I'm coming through loud and clear. All right. So how are you doing tonight, Morgoth?
I'm doing good. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat there. I'm doing good. I was just having a look. This seems like it's going to be like sort of Radio 2 of the Dissident Right tonight on here. Two pretty obscure films, proper classic films. I'm doing okay. Just feels weird to be doing classic movies this late, but whatever. I'm fine.
Good. So yeah, we had to move the time schedule around for this evening, but I'm glad to be here nonetheless. Okay, so the first, why did I choose these two films? I chose them both because they're very similar films. They both are about mutinies which take place aboard British ships in the Royal Navy during the late 18th century. Both films were released in 1962, and they both have very similar themes, but each of them has some themes that are unique to them. And I honestly can't decide which film I like better. I like both of them, but maybe for different reasons. So the first one we're going to talk about is one that's probably a bit more famous. It's called Mutiny on the Bounty. Now, it's based on an actual historical event that happened in the 1880s, but the film takes a lot of liberties with the history. So there's lots of inaccuracies, there's lots of things which they changed for the purpose of the plot. But it is it's set on the backdrop of an actual event. So I'll give a short breakdown of the plot of Mutiny on the Bounty for anyone who hasn't seen it or doesn't know about the historical event. So it starts in 1787. So there's a ship called the Bounty in the Royal Navy, which is captained by a lieutenant named William Bligh. And the ship is tasked with sailing from England to Tahiti in order to collect breadfruit. It's kind of like an edible plant that grows in Tahiti. And they're supposed to transport it to Jamaica, where it will be fed to slaves. And then if the plant is successful and it makes for a good food source, they're going to sell it to the world, this plant. So their mission is to bring this plant from Tahiti to Jamaica. So the first officer of the ship is a man named Fletcher Christian. So he's the lead character. He's played by Marlon Brando, and the Captain William Bligh is played by Trevor Howard, another actor of the era. So they have this problem that when that this breadfruit that they're trying to collect, it has a dormant period. So this means that for several months of the year, the fruit can't be replanted, meaning that if they arrive in Tahiti late, they're not going to be able to take the plant for several months because they won't be able to successfully replant it. So on the journey from England to Tahiti, their course is meant to be around the Cape of Good Hope, around where South Africa is today, but Captain Bligh decides that he's going to try to take a shortcut going around the Cape Horn at the very southern tip of South America, which is some of the most treacherous weather in the world. It's stormy, it's cold, it's a really dangerous passage for ships back in the 18th century. And they spend several weeks trying to cross into the Pacific Ocean from Cape Horn, but they're unsuccessful. And having wasted a few valuable weeks on their journey, they decide to turn around and then head to Tahiti via the Cape of Good Hope. And what happens is they arrive in Tahiti late. So the breadfruit's dormant period has already set in. And, having made this long journey, what they end up having to do is they end up having to stay in Tahiti for 5 months until the dormant period of this breadfruit is over and they can plant it again and then transport it to Jamaica. So one thing that Tahiti kind of became infamous for in the 18th century was that it was kind of a sailor's paradise because of mostly because of the Tahitian women. Like, let's be honest here. The Tahitian women were they thought European men were extremely beautiful. They showed a lot of affection for them, and they would put out very easily. The men that the sailors that got to stay in Tahiti had a lot of sex. Like, let's just put it that way. And they really enjoyed their time there, especially after being at sea for months and months and months. So Marlon Brando's character, Christian, the one of the officers aboard the ship, he's actually not the first officer. I think I misspoke earlier, but he's one of the officers. He becomes like infatuated by a Tahitian woman, and all of the crew members, while staying for 5 months on Tahiti, they after their long journey where they tried to cross from Cape Horn, a long, like 10-month long journey where they were on board the ship, and Captain Bligh is like seen as like a very heavy-handed and cruel and ruthless captain, one who has very harsh punishments for infractions. They spend a very relaxed time on Tahiti, and 3 weeks after they leave Tahiti, many of the men now want to return. And I don't think this actually happened in the history, but what they have Captain Bligh do in the movie is that he wants to conserve water for the breadfruit, so the breadfruit doesn't die on the journey to Jamaica. So he cuts the water rations for the troops, for the sailors, in half, so they're all like really extremely thirsty, and he starts enforcing extreme punishments on them by flogging them, and one guy even gets keyhauled, which is when they throw the guy off the front of the boat, and the boat basically just runs him over and kills him. And then Christian basically becomes more and more disenfranchised with Bligh's rule, seeing him as like this cruel and sadistic captain. And he leads a mutiny. So this is the mutiny on the Bounty. Christian and several sailors take over control of the Bounty, and they depose Captain Bligh. They don't kill him, but they force him into a lifeboat and cast him off. But the majority of the crew, about 2/3, I think, actually decide to stay loyal. They do not join in the mutiny, and they decide to be cast off with Captain Bligh into this small little boat. So the mutineers are now like just sailing around the Pacific Ocean. They stop in Tahiti to pick up a few more men and Tahitian women with them, and they eventually come across this island called the Pitcairn Island, which is in this really remote island in the Pacific. Captain Bligh actually does make it back to England, and then they send out a search party looking for the mutineers. And the film basically ends with the mutineers on this remote island, where Christian, he basically has become really despondent, realizing that he basically has thrown his own life away and the lives of the crew members as well. And he even says to them that he's considering going back to England and stating his case and facing justice, even if that means being hanged. And the film ends with the crew burning the Bounty, and Christian dies actually trying to save the Bounty, trying to put out the fire. But it's not really clear how he actually died historically, but that's how the film puts it. So anyway, that's basically a breakdown of the plot. I'll pass it over to Morgoth. What did you think about Mutiny on the Bounty?
Well, I love it. I love this whole genre of film. And there's a lot to be said about it, because I think what attracts me about these kind of movies is that when you've got the captain on a ship for years, like literally years, it becomes a sort of meditation on how men are ruled, and how far you've got to go and discipline them. You've got to maintain order. You've got to maintain respect, and both of these films are like that. But on this particular version of Mutiny on the Bounty, I'd seen the Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson one quite a few times, but I'd never seen this one before. And what I was surprised at was, like, I didn't have time to look it up, but I was interested, like, in how much sort of clout Marlon Brando had on this in this film, because his portrayal of Fletcher Christian is kind of very Brando-esque. And Martin Brando has this thing where he'll take a character and kind of twist it in ways that you don't expect. And there's a whole kind of subcurrent on this, which is that Fletcher Christian is actually quite aristocratic and presenting as a bit of a dandy and a bit of a fop, whereas Captain Bligh he's actually sort of lower class, and he's had to work his way through the ranks the hard way. And that kind of simmers away throughout sort of the first 2/3 of the film. Marlon Brando doesn't actually do or say very much. He just kind of looks from the sidelines for the first, like for really a long stretch of the movie, and it's really down to Trevor Howard as Bligh, who's much harsher in this than Anthony Hopkins is in that one. But I thought that was interesting, and you see Brando in his like silk dressing gown, and I thought this is strange because he doesn't really come across as one of the men. He looks down on them. He's kind of, it's like this very sort of Brando kind of take on the character, which is that he's kind of cleverer than everybody else. He's a little bit sort of smug and arrogant, but at the same time, he's kind of cunning and a bit thoughtful. It's a very there's a movie called Missouri Breaks with Brando and Jack Nicholson in, and Brando's performance in this reminded me of that. In that one, it's a western, and Brando is this like paid hitman to hunt down sort of bandits and whatnot. And he does the same thing again. He plays the role of like a weird kind of dandy, but he gets dressed up as women, and he's kind of strangely sadistic at the same time. And I guess this is why Brando gets built up so much, because it's not just that he's a great actor, but he kind of does something odd with his roles, which make them stick in your mind. So that was, and I think Trevor Howard, he plays it as you would expect, sort of traditional British admiralty. The big question, like, he's certainly harsh, but it's whether he's harsh but fair. And this one does tend to have a negative view, because part of the mutiny sort of saga is like, which side who do you have more sympathy with? Do you have more sympathy with the kind of the average sailor who is sort of literally under the lash, but maybe they are like unruly, maybe they do need the lash? Or is it with the kind of the noble admiral and all of this kind of, you got to be cruel to be fair, or whatever it is? So that's kind of my initial sort of kickoff with this. I thought Brando's performance was kind of odd, and Christian is like strangely difficult to like. But then again, Trevor Howard is a bit of a monster.
Yeah, so I mean, I like this film genre for much of the same reason. I love the I love the backdrop of it being like these men on a ship for years and years, and the kind of like what really goes on in that ship. How is how is order maintained? Because, like, recently I've been reading the book that you recommended to me, On Power by Bertrand de Juvenel, and as people who on the internet and stuff, we discuss these issues all the time about how power works in wider society. Well, one of these ships really was at the time, especially before things like the Marconi wireless system, but when it really was just a ship in the middle of the ocean, isolated from the rest of civilized society for years on end. It basically is, a state. Like it functions like, in effect, like a state within itself in some ways. So we'll get it. This is like the theme that applies to both these movies, and we'll get into that. But I also just want to say that other thing I love about these movies is just the sense of adventure. That I love this era in history. I mean, I named my channel after the HMS Endeavour. That's the ship which James Cook sailed to Australia on his first voyage. He stopped in Tahiti as well, though James Cook himself was a married man and a gentleman. He did not partake, but his crew certainly liked their time there. But I really just love that the kind of the era of history that both these films are set in. It's a bit different than the ones that we've talked about, because we've watched a lot of movies and reviewed them that take place in the later 19th century. You know, when the British Empire was at its height, Britannia ruled the wave. The world had been conquered. This is before that, so the West was certainly the hegemon of the world. There were certain and ascending, but at the same time, there was still a lot of adventure to be had in that. There was all these undiscovered places, and I really love that about this genre of movie. But what I wanted to talk about first was kind of just how military discipline is enforced at sea, because it's really fascinating, the Royal Navy's strict authority structure, because and you have to realize how important this really is, because adherence to military discipline among a crew is essential, because they're isolated at sea for so long in really harsh conditions. And when you're cut off from the rest of civilized society, you know, what is stopping men from pulling off a mutiny? Well, it has to be like this strict enforcement of the hierarchy of command. Punishment for infractions were harsh. Things like denial of rations, putting them in the irons, imprisonment, or flogging even. And these punishments were common for, you know, what were in many ways not even very harsh infractions. But, you know, they needed some way to maintain order, because, you know, much like the way a government needs to maintain order in the state that it governs, the officers aboard a ship need to maintain order in the same way. But it's a lot more difficult when the ship is a lot smaller and there's a lot fewer of them. So, you know, the officers were kind of segregated from the rest of the crew. They needed to remain distant because they had to keep that aura of respect around them. The men had to both fear and respect the officers at the same time. Things like what Machiavelli talks about in The Prince. You know, it's extremely important for that officer to be respected and to be feared. And he really can't be buddy with the crew, because he really can't be buddy with the crew, because they need to view him as an authority above them. If he's too nice and if he's too intimate with them, then they're not going to respect him. They're not going to respect his authority. They're not going to see him as the authority governing them. And, you know, when that happens at sea, your crew should be in for a lot of trouble if that happens. So it's really fascinating how that's enforced.
It also depends on the conditions and what you're up against. So part of the problem is you're stuck on the ship itself for years on end, which is already a problem when it's like you've got the officers, you've got the captain, then you've got all of the men, and you're going to have the usual tensions, and you're going to have the usual frustrations. You're going to have people who don't like each other. You're going to have this is the thing, like, let's be honest, a lot of the men are going to be scumbags. They're going to be press ganged off the docks. They're going to be pickpockets and thieves. They're not going to be all like great people, you know. There's a whole, which is mainly in when we'll get to of the Defiant, but there's a sort of a class kind of thing with that. There's this kind of disillusioned sort of lefty take on it, where they're actually the working class. They're not that great. They're not these angelic angels. I mean, of course, and today the left have done away with all that anyway. But the point is, there used to be this kind of Marxist sort of framing, which of course runs diametrically opposed to the structure of something like the British Admiralty of the 1800s or whatever. But then on top of all of that, you've got something like the just how severe it is to go around the Cape Horn. Like that is an extreme situation to be in, and everybody will die if everybody isn't kept in line. It's the same thing as, like, even if there's somebody who is diddling a little bit of food, who's, you know, there's a whole thing with cheese in I think it's in the Defiant, where
that's a Mutiny and Bounty at the beginning.
Yeah, is that one? Because I watched them like more or less back to back, so we're kind of merged into one big salty sea dog epic. But yeah, so somebody who is squirreling away food from the kitchen or from the stocks, that's a major problem, because it's all been calculated in to last a certain amount of time for a certain amount of people. So discipline has to be enforced ruthlessly. I mean, one of the things I'll say is that when I was young, and I look, because I've known of the legend of the Mutiny on the Bounty. I think there is an element where when you're young, when you're a boy and you watch something like this, you will side with Fletcher Christian. And when you become older, when you become a man, and you've been around a little bit, you tend to side with Bly, because you realize that actually the people need to be kept in line. Basically, it's as simple as that. Like this ideal where everybody's just great, everybody's honest. Nobody's a scumbag who's going to stab you in the back. That's just like it's kind of childlike. And when you get older and you've kind of got a few scars under your belt, and you've seen how men actually are, yeah, they need that. They need to be whipped like dogs. To be honest, that's something that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I mean, there's even the scene where Bly basically explains his authority. What he says is, he doesn't think cruelty for cruelty's sake is right, but like if you're trying to sail around Cape Horn and you're telling a sailor to climb up on those ropes and go, like, I don't know how 18th century sailboats work, but you have to go do something on those sails while there's like a minus 30-degree gust, like just like swishing the boat about, and the boat is going over these huge waves. Well, what he says is basically that sailor needs to be more afraid of disobeying that order than obeying it, because if you don't get someone to go up on the sail and do whatever it is that they need to do up there, that ship is going to sink. The entire ship is going to fall. The crew is going to die, and whatever their mission is going to fail. So you do need someone to go up there and do it. But obviously, it takes a pretty brave man to actually climb up on the ropes like that. Like I always think in all these movies, like I see the guys just like barely hanging on over the edge, and you think like, one false move, he's he's overboard and he's going to die. But you need to have that though.
And another interesting element of Mutiny on the Bounty, the 1962 one that we're talking about, that I would like just to sort of put it in a wider context, is interesting when you think of Marlon Brando and what was going on at the time, which was this sort of, if you look at Brando's earlier one, the Wild one, I think it was, you did have this element of teenage rebellion. It was 50s America, and you had the boomers would at that time have been very, like, the youngsters, they would have been just maybe entering their teens, the older boomers. You had Brando, you had James Dean, you had this kind of beatnik kind of element of it was the in a way the first rebellion, which still hasn't stopped. Like now it's like people are rebelling against their sex, but the first one was encouraging people to rebel against their parents, especially their fathers, which is to say, like. And then more widely, it was rebelling against authority. And I do think it's you can't really, like, that's the context that this movie was made in. That's what Hollywood was kind of just starting to ease its way into, was that there would be a separate category of sort of people, and it would be the youth, it would be the young people, and they would be kind of nudged by Hollywood and by the culture more generally into this kind of rebellion against authority. And it's very strange that in Mutiny on the Bounty, it's that exact story, and it's Marlon Brando who is again the person who is rebelling against authority, but in his own kind of cool way, his own kind of cool, charismatic way, which isn't obvious at first.
Yeah. So, one thing that I find interesting as well is the scenes in Tahiti, because, what the film kind of portrays is that the reason for the mutiny is that Bly was a son of a bitch, that he was a cruel and ruthless and sadistic captain who enjoyed being who enjoyed punishing his crew, which I don't think is the case when even from in a historical sense, or from even the movie itself, because he does explain like his reasoning for his style of leadership. But I have to feel that the thing that really kind of that kind of made the mutiny happen was it has to have been those 5 months in Tahiti, because when you consider that, like you said before, how much discipline needs to be enforced, and that these are not nicest guys in the world. These sailors are often real bastards themselves. That they spent, like, I think it was 10 months sailing from England to Tahiti. They had that failed attempt to sail around Cape Horn, where it was blistering cold and dangerous. And then, imagine like and then, you're on the rations constantly. You're not being fed very well. You only get, and the food's kind of shit. And then I just imagine like you get to this island where the weather's nice and warm. There's fruit and fish and pork everywhere. The women are, the women put out, and you can have sex whenever you want. From the perspective of the sailors, and then you have to also consider that they spent 5 months there. Because if it was 1 week or so, then that could have been then maybe it wouldn't have been as big of a problem. But I have to think that they must have really like lost their appetite for military discipline there. Because, what the film shows is that they're basically the sailors, like the guys who were, under the whip just a few weeks earlier. It shows them there like running around the beaches, chasing after cute Tahitian women, eating a bunch of fruit and all this steaks, and they have fish, and they have those big what's it called? Those Polynesian flower necklaces on, and it looks like they're on vacation, really. But it was like that for 5 months.
I mean, the people who made the film went all out to make Tahiti look like paradise. Now, okay, fair enough. It does look like a wonderful place, especially if you've been eating weevil-filled bread on a ship for the last 2 years. But they certainly went all out to make it look like paradise on earth. This utopia where there is no authority. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. You just get with a pretty girl and slip into the bushes and have sex whenever you want. It's like the Garden of Eden. I mean, the scene where I will say it's a very nicely shot scene where you've got the Tahitian men in the water and they're beating the fish towards the women, and the women are with strategically placed flower necklaces to cover their boobs, and then they've got like a huge ring of nets, and the cinematography and everything's really good. And they circle all the fish and they drag them into this big trap, and the men jump in, and it's all wonderful. So you've got healthy food on hand, you've got women on hand. There's nobody telling you what to do. I mean, to be fair, you can tell, like Tahiti, like how the dodo like became this big dopey bird that couldn't fly, yeah, and the kakapo on New Zealand, where they became these fat flightless parrots who can't escape rats because the island life kind of made them so safe and so secluded that they just lost the ability to defend themselves. I mean, the only reason that Tahiti can exist in that way, if that's like representative, and I believe that it probably was to some degree, but it can only really exist like that because it is so isolated from the rest of the world. It's a tragic kind of commentary on the human race, where you can only actually have the Garden of Eden if as humanity's like kept thousands and thousands of miles away from it. I mean, Britain was an island, and there's no way in hell we could have lived that existence, because we would have just been invaded and wiped out, as we nearly were. One of the reasons we had to have a big navy was to protect ourselves from being invaded all of the time. The only way we could expand and gain more resources was through the navy, and doing exactly what Captain Bligh and the Bounty were doing. So there is a sort of element to it where Tahiti was just like absolute, just depicted as paradise on earth.
Yeah, so I have to think that, like, after that amount of time on Tahiti, then like consider like you're now back on the ship, and you're forced to go back onto the shit rations that you're given, and doing the hard work, and then you're under military discipline, so you do have officers who are being very strict. I mean, after 5 months of that, I do think that has to have been like maybe the thing that the thing that caused the mutiny the most, because pretty much all ship captains at the time. I mean, by today's standards, they would have been seen as like as mean sons of bitches. But they had to enforce that kind of authority, like we mentioned. But I have to think of maybe the 5 months of the Tahiti must have been what caused them to lose the discipline. There's another.
Well,
there's
I was just going to say, I've picked a nice quote from Wikipedia, which sums this up quite nicely. Because I know people give Wikipedia a hard time, but I do think it's on this kind of thing, they're going to be honest. It's the more hot button political things of the day where you can't trust it. I think it's going to be fair enough on this kind of history. But I wish I'd tracked who said this, but basically it says, the reasons behind the mutiny are still debated. Some sources report that Bligh was a tyrant whose abuse of the crew led them to feel that they had no choice but to take over the ship. Other sources argue that Bligh was no worse, and in many cases gentler, than the average captain and naval officer of the era, and that the crew, inexperienced and unused to the rigours of the sea, were corrupted by the freedom, idleness, and sexual license of their 5 months on Tahiti, finding themselves unwilling to return to the jack-tars life of an ordinary seaman. This view holds that most of the men supported Christian's prideful personal vendetta against Bligh out of a misguided hope that their new captain would return them to Tahiti to live their lives hedonistically and in peace, free from Bligh's acid tongue and strict discipline. And I think that is interesting, because it's interesting to touch on the temptations there. This will come back and Defiant, but I mean, who would you have sided with on that? Given that you get to go back on the ship with Bligh, even if you think he's a fair officer, even if you understand the mission and all of that, or you can like live on Tahiti and in paradise. There is a like you can turn it around without making Bligh out to be this monstrous bastard. You can say, well, at the end of the day, I can live on paradise with beautiful women, olive skin beauties, and eat fish and fruit all day, and lie under the sun on the beach. Leaving, like, even if Bligh was a great guy, even if he was like nice and gentle, benevolent and all of this, that's still a temptation, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, for a sailor of the 18th century, it would be very tempting, especially after having spent 5 months there. There's another scene that I wanted to something that happened on Tahiti, which I think is actually, I don't know if this is what the film was going for, but I think this is actually of more significance than a lot of people realize. And I don't know I don't know whether this actually happened historically, but from the standpoint of the film, there's the scene where they're having that big like festival, and they're playing the drums and dancing and things like that. And then I think that the king wants Captain Bligh to dance with I think it's his daughter, the one that Christian later falls in love with. But he basically wants Captain Bligh to partake in this dance, and Captain Bligh initially says, "Oh no!" But then the king of Tahiti, or the chief, or whatever he was, he gets offended, and then Bligh says, "Oh well, sorry, I didn't understand, Your Majesty." And then Bligh actually then goes and wearing one of these flower necklace thingies. He's like in the middle, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just dancing there like an idiot, and all of his crew members are watching this. I think that if that were to happen with the captain of an actual ship, I really feel that would be a real blow to his credibility, because you have to remember that these men would have spent months and months on the ship with him and under his rule, and he can be a really strict captain. And like I mentioned, the officers needed to maintain that the aura of respect, that when the men see them, that they realize this is someone who's above me, this is someone of authority. So if you were one of these sailors, then you spent all those months like that, and then you're on Tahiti, and you're basically seeing your captain like dance like an idiot. It would really really damage that kind of aura of respect that you had for him, and then you wouldn't be able to take him as seriously as you had before, knowing that he had done that.
Yeah, and it's similar if Bligh started cavorting around with one of the girls, it would have damaged them, like severely. And I think the dance did do that, but there was another part which happens like just after that, and it's when Bligh discovers Fletcher Christian with a girl under the bush, and his basic. It's weird because he's got this kind of very sort of Christian morality, and his assumption is that the king of the island would be totally disgusted with that. Like that's playing with fire. And he even says later, like basically in a civilized part of the world, if you're caught cavorting with a man's daughter like that, it's like a declaration of war. And then, of course, it turns out that the island is so degenerate in Bligh's eyes that the king takes it as a snub when Fletcher Christian doesn't actually fully have sex with the daughter, because Bligh's pretty much pulled him off. And then you get this kind of painful scene where they go along and they say, well, actually, we take this. The snub is that you think you're too good for our women. And so the tables are turned on Bligh, and you get this painful sort of back and forth in Bligh's cabin, where Fletcher Christian makes him spell out explicitly that he has to go back and sleep with the native girl out of respect for the king. And I mean, to be fair, as I say, it's like the Tahitians have got like a kakapo or a dodo or something. They've just got no self-awareness at all. They're kind of like sort of modern shit libs or something, where they've just got this just literally throw open your legs to the world kind of
literally.
Literally. And Captain Bligh he's just totally astounded by it. But so they have to go off. I mean, again, like you see this kind of hippie kind of boomerish thing about it, which like if that went on, that would be the end, and it probably was the end of their civilization. Whereas I bet the cannibal islands, because there's islands in it which are full of cannibals who killed Captain Cook and ate him or whatever.
Yeah,
I bet
Hawaii.
And the general like Bligh saying, it's best just to avoid those ones. Like the Tahitians are known for being soft shit lips. Like they'll be fine to go there, but we don't. There's a lot in that. There's a lot of civilizational lessons in that. Whereas the cannibals, it's like, oh, we'll let them alone. Don't go near them.
Yeah, I mean, I will say one of the funniest parts of the movie is after that like painful scene where Bligh is basically explaining to Christian that like he needs him to go to sleep with the captain's daughter. I love the part where there's that little boat taking Christian from the Bounty to the shore, and it's playing Rural Britannia. Yeah.
What are you gonna say?
Well, no, I mean it's just really funny that they have like Rural Britannia playing as Christians being taken to shore where he has to go sleep with the king's daughter.
There's another bit on that which like literally made me burst out laughing. Where another one of it's one of the officers, I think, he comes back on the ship and he's got one of the girls with him, and he's like, they're all the way they've done it's really funny because they've set up they play this nice romantic music and it's this kind of love theme, and he brings the girl up onto the boat, and he's so proud of himself. And he looks at Captain, and he approaches Captain Bligh, and he says, "Captain, I've got something wonderful to report. I'm in love, and I want to marry this woman. I want your permission." And Bligh kind of looks up and down at the girl, and then looks him up and down and bursts out laughing. And he says, "I'll log it. Now get that slut off my ship." I thought,
oh man!
I'll put it in the logbook. Now get that slut off my ship. It was like the love of his life. I thought, ooh, that's harsh. That's a hard man. That like.
But no, I mean, yeah, the Tahitians as a civilization, I mean, they'd be gone within. I mean, I think that people still live on Tahiti, but yeah. Well, let's just say that there's a reason that the British ruled the world and not the Tahitians. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, there's many a civilizational lesson in what happened there. Like, but I bet the cannibals lasted longer. I'd have to look it up, but I bet the cannibals lasted longer than the Tahitians. Like,
yeah. So the question we should get to is like, who is a better officer, Christian or Bligh? And what I have to think is that even by the standard of the film, which I don't know if this, I don't know to what degree it's accurate. It does seem like they played up how cruel Bligh really was, but like you said, like the youthful rebel in you sides with Christian, and the older man sides with Bligh. I mean, when you consider like not their personalities, not which one's a nicer guy. When you consider which one actually got the mission done and brought his men home alive, I think it's pretty clear that Bligh was the better officer. Because first of all, we mentioned, if you're the captain of one of these ships, you can't be a nice guy. You kind of have to be heavy-handed with that for the reasons that we mentioned. But then, in addition, that I mean, they had a mission. Their mission was to bring the breadfruit from Tahiti to Jamaica, and Captain Bligh was entrusted with that mission, one that was given him by the Admiralty. And then, furthermore, when he was cast off of the ship, now they could have made a movie out of this on its own, but the journey that little lifeboat, which Bligh and about 18 or so sailors were put in, that thing went thousands of kilometers to, I think it was to Batavia in the Dutch East Indies. That is a massive journey for just such a little boat. And there was a few of them didn't make it, but he delivered most of the men that were put into that boat to Batavia alive.
Yeah, I think he just lost one man, and that was to a cannibal on an island somewhere. But I will say the 1962 one, the fact that they show almost nothing of that journey, it has to be a strike against it. Like, it's a good film and everything, but I think the bias. This is why I mentioned the kind of embryonic boomerism of it. That it is stacked against Bligh, because he was a hero. Like what he went through, and what he achieved in that boat with those men, it was phenomenal, and it deserves some recognition. And they gave it nothing, because it would kind of skewer the audience's interpretation, and they'd be more sympathetic to Bligh. Now, the Anthony Hopkins, Mel Gibson one, they like there's a good 45 minutes of the film where Anthony Hopkins is Bligh, and it is his journey, it is them surviving. And there's even a part where the rations are running low and the men are starting to kind of kick up a fuss, and Bligh enforces half rations on himself to sort of set the scene, to sort of set the bar, as if to say, well, I'm on half rations, so you can do it as well. And what that does is kind of vindicate him on his earlier strictness, because he wasn't a hypocrite. He would also go through the tough times. He would also face restrictions. It was like he always was able to do that. And then so your kind of sympathy towards Bligh increases more and more. And when he eventually gets to the Admiralty, and explains the story, he kind of they kind of vindicate him. And there's this look on his face of just sheer. That's what he needed. He needed that, because it's so hierarchical, that he needed the approval of his betters, and he ended up getting it as well. And that it's a powerful moment. Whereas there's almost none of that. He gets castigated in the 1962 one. But what I will say is, to sort of counterpoint that, when you get to Brando and you go back and they're on the island, there's a funny thing begins to happen, because as you were talking about with the efficiency, which what Brando does is begin to question. Brando is Christian, of course. He begins to question the other men from Bligh's point of view. And he's saying at the end of the day, like, Bligh was charged with a task. He has his own superiors. They are back in London. They're in the Admiralty. It's the British government. And they are, in a way, kind of lashing him. They need him to get something done. And if you listen to Bligh, that was never about sort of being vindictive or cruel. It was about being efficient. He needed efficiency. He needed the ship to run like clockwork to get the job done. And it seems to have dawned on Christian, Brando's Christian, later on, after after the mutiny and they're on the island. But I think something else has happened as well. And it's that what Richard Harris is there in an early role, and he's kind of the dodgiest person. If there's a real villain in it, it's Richard Harris. But what I think is interesting is that now that they've, in a way, sort of bumped off, once they've done mutiny once against the legitimate captain of the ship, like, there's nothing to stop them doing it. Like, the second time, when it's a pretender, when it's the second officer or lieutenant, then it becomes all the more easy, because he's a legitimate anyway. Once you've actually bumped off the king and then you've got the pretender to the throne, it's easy. It's even easier to get rid of him. And that's kind of where it goes.
Yeah, because the settlement on Pitcairn Island, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, basically, like, and what you can look into the history on what happened later. It was not that successful. I mean, it did succeed in that the men who settled there actually did have descendants, but it certainly was not like the heaven on earth that they show on Tahiti in the movie, because when you consider that a lot of them actually, like, just ended up murdering each other. So what they think actually happened to Christian was he was actually murdered by some of the Tahitian men who they took with them. Because some of the mutineers stayed on Tahiti, and some of them went to this other island. And what actually happened was, and they show this in the movie too, that there were some men who wanted to remain loyal. Because I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it was I think I did look at it earlier today, but it was roughly, I think, like a third of the men who were considered mutineers. So the majority were loyal to Bligh, but they couldn't fit all of the people who wanted to leave on the boat that they cast off. So they had to take some men with them who didn't want to take any part in the mutiny. So those ones were dropped off at Tahiti, and several of the mutineers landed in Tahiti as well. And for Tahiti, maybe it was kind of like this Garden of Eden. At least that's how they portrayed it in the movie. But what actually happened is that the guys who were left there, the mutineers that did stay in Tahiti, a lot of them were hanged. So they eventually the Royal Navy returned to Tahiti, thinking that as the most likely destination of the mutineers, and they caught some of them, and several of them were hanged. So their luck ran out eventually. But then also with the mutineers who went to the Pitcairn Island, a lot of them ended up murdering each other. So they think that Fletcher Christian was actually killed, was actually murdered by some of the Tahitian men who were brought with them. When the island was discovered, I think in 1808, so this would have been about 18 years later. There was only one man left on the island. It was one of the sailors and the Tahitian women who they had brought with them, and then some children, so some of the descendants of the mutineers. But really, it seems like the only thing that actually got that new settlement to actually stabilize was when there was, one undisputed patriarch left who, and that was, he was the clear authority. So, really Christian, he may have been like, now I don't know whether this is the truth or not. It's also worth mentioning that in real life, Bligh and Christian were actually a lot better friends than the movie lets on. They actually had sailed together before, and I think Bligh had actually he considered Christian like his kind of like his protege, and he was absolutely shocked when Christian mutinied. I think I even read there somewhere that Bligh said, "But I can't believe you're doing this. Didn't you were in my home? You had my children on your knee, or something like that." So ultimately, the men who stuck with Bligh ended up getting the better end of the stick, because most of them got back to England alive.
Yeah, and more there's a whole thing with Fletcher Christian's descendants where everybody on Pitcairn Island seems to have been his offspring. I remember there was when I was a kid, there was a BBC celebrity chef. I forgot his first name now. Maybe somebody in the chat can remember. But his second name was Christian, and he claimed to be a descendant of Fletcher Christian. And it's like half the island claimed to be the descendants of Fletcher Christian. Maybe there's some truth to it. I don't know. It's just one of those weird kind of legends lost to the mist of time.
Yeah, but even then, they have at the end of the movie that he does start to second guess himself. He does start to, as you said, he starts to put himself in Bligh's shoes, and then think about, well, and I think that he realizes, and what you do see after the mutiny is he is despondent. Like the rest of the crew are asking what to do, and you can tell he's basically he realizes that he's basically thrown his life away, and pretty much the lives of the mutineers too. There's a great line I like where just as Christian puts Bligh into the boat, he says he takes out the whip, and he gives it to Bligh and says, "Take this. You're going to need your flag." And Bligh replies to him, "I don't need a flag. Unlike you, I still have a country."
Yeah, because he's forfeited his country, and there's another bit of that, which is that because Christian was kind of more liberal, it did for him. It's kind of like, it's weird how the cat o' nine tails became a sort of symbol of oppression, and Christian handed it mockingly to Bligh, as if to say, "This is here you are. Here is your symbol of oppression. Take it with you. This is your flag." And so Christian is not only without a country, he's also without the kind of means by which to enforce his authority, and that both do him in. And what's telling is that Bligh says to him a line which I think could be interpreted a couple of ways. And he says, "Wherever you go, whatever you do, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there coming after you." Now, the obvious thing, the way you can sort of think about that, is that Bligh will be chasing him down with the rest of the Navy on a ship. But I think there's another way to look at it would be he in a sort of Dostoevsky novel, Bligh's going to be gnawing him away at him, at his consciousness and things. And I think that's actually what happens in the end.
Yeah, because before that, he even gets to the point where he says he would return to England even if it means facing the gallows. And the other thing to point out, when there's the other scene so it's after the mutiny took place, and then there's these three ordinary sailors in what's now Christian's quarters, the captain's quarters, and he basically says, "Well, now you're my officers." And this is a big problem because you can just see by the look of these guys, like none of them are prepared to be officers. And the problem is that they don't have the same aura of respect that an actual officer in the Royal Navy had, because just weeks earlier, these guys had just been the mates with the other guys. They would have been on the same level, and now they're placed in a position of authority above them, and that's a big problem. Like they're not going to be able to enforce order the same way that an actual officer who was had that air of respect around him that they could do it.
Yeah, they don't want it. They kind of shy away from it. It all falls apart pretty quickly, actually, the mutiny. What they've done is take away the rigid power structure, and it all just goes to hell. And then the final act as well, where like they burn they set fire to the bounty, which means they're stuck on the island forever. Like they've imprisoned themselves, just as what they were under Bligh. Now they are kind of prisoners on that island.
Yeah, and I think that the mutiny on the Bounty kind of follows the same course that most mutinies and revolts, at least ones that weren't well organized and didn't have like a clear elite structure behind them. Most of them end up really kind of going that same way. I think of something like the Paris Commune in 1871. The bunch of radical leftists, socialists, anarchists were able to take over Paris, one of the biggest cities in Europe, for about 2 months. But what really happened was it was just complete chaos and a bunch of people getting shot and no real sense of order. And then eventually the French army just marched in, took Paris back and hanged most of them, or guillotined, I guess, in the French case. But that kind of really is how most mutinies actually end up going. Think about, now I don't want to sound like a shit lib here and say that, oh, this was an insurrection, but think about something like January 6th. It was just a bunch of Trump supporters, maybe quite naive, boomerish Gen Xers types, who probably grew up on a lot of that kind of like youthful rebellion thing. And like they just walk into the Capitol building and just wandering around there. It didn't really turn out like they imagined. Not that I think that their goal was to like overthrow the government or anything like that, but it just goes to show like how these kind of revolts really kind of end up going. They always really descend into chaos unless there is another hierarchical structure which steps in and takes rule through the revolt. They really kind of just end up falling apart.
There was something happened in America in the summer of Floyd, wasn't there, where they did like
Chaz.
They did, and then people were being raped and murdered and everything. You never even hear that now. Like people, there were literally like anarchist, like sections of American cities were taken over. Do you remember when they had that like little plant? They had like a little garden and everything, didn't they? They were, and it is. I'm not really going too far off topic because eventually they just seem to sort of pack up their stuff and go home. It just all fell apart. What was that? Why do we never hear about that now? Like, what the hell was going on there? Wasn't it? That was like just 2.5 years ago. But I'm like anarchist rebellion. They're purely astroturfed in my view. But still, like parts of American cities like were turned into communes. And people were trying to go back to nature and everything. What the hell was that? And then it lasted for like a summer, and then where are all the people from? What was it called? Chaz,
yeah.
Where are they all now?
Yeah. I mean, it was playing. It was allowed to happen because it was allowed to happen because it was useful for the elites at the time. If it had been an actual revolt, that thing would have been crushed in seconds. Like, let's be honest here. So yeah, it only like, I don't want to say succeeded, but it only happened because it was allowed to happen. But even then, like if we consider, this like shit show that went on that was allowed to go on. Yeah. What ended up happening in this like section of Oregon, a couple of street blocks, which were blocked off by anarchists for several weeks or even months. I can't remember exactly how long it was. But yeah, you had like rapes, murders, you had all this stuff. I mean, they had like these hippy dippy shit lib ideas of, anti-racism and whatever. And it was like all this like murder and rape and stuff going on in these like city blocks. And well, I mean, that just goes to show what really happens when the authority structure breaks down and why on a ship it's so important.
That's also, like, call me a cynic, but that's also why I don't believe Tahiti was actually like that. Look, I don't know. I haven't looked into this. I haven't read up on this, but I've got a sneaky suspicion that Tahiti would have been more like Chaz than like the Garden of Eden that we get to see in Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yeah, I tend to get that feeling as well. But anyway, I think we should switch over to the second film that we're going to talk about. So the next one is HMS Defiant. So do you have anything left to say about Mutiny on Bounty, or are you ready to go over to the next one?
Not really. I think we're ready to go, but it's we'll probably jump back and forth anyway.
Yeah, we can do that. That's no problem. So I'll give another short plot breakdown of the film HMS Defiant. So this one takes place a decade later. So it takes place during the War of the First Coalition in 1797. So Great Britain and her allies are at war with the French Republic following the French Revolution. This is before Napoleon became the emperor, but basically he was on his ascendance to power. He was at the point becoming a very successful general in the new revolutionary French army. So the major theme of the film is, again, how harsh service in the Royal Navy was. The very first scene has the HMS Defiant. It's a fictional ship, but it's based on a real ship that's called the Defiance. Very similar. So basically, the first scene of the movie is them arriving in, I think it's Portsmouth in England. Was that correct? A coastal village in the south.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically they get there, and there's what's called the press gang. The press gang are people who basically have to pick up random guys off the street in towns in England and force them into service in the Navy, because suffice to say, most people didn't want to do that job, so they just had to choose people to conscript. So the first scene is them rounding up a bunch of sailors who they're going to conscript into the Royal Navy and bring aboard the ship. So from the very, very beginning of the movie, there's a mutiny brewing among a number of ships in the Royal Navy. And they don't consider the organizers of this mutiny don't want to consider themselves to be mutineers, but rather protesters. They insist that they're not revolutionaries. They're loyal to their country, but what they're doing, they're trying to plan a protest or a mutiny, which it is, they're going to basically strike for better wages and conditions, because as we all know, the conditions were not so great. So the HMS Defiant is basically tasked with sailing to Corsica through the Mediterranean Sea, and it's under the rule of a guy named Captain Crawford, played by Alec Guinness, who's actually a rather humane officer. In this one, it's not the captain; it's the first officer. His lieutenant, who's called Scott Paget, is basically a ruthless bastard, and he seems to derive pleasure from cruelty. I mean, they really play up how awful this guy really is. So on their journey, Crawford and Scott Paget clash over the captain's decision to pursue the orders to sail to Corsica when they hear that Napoleon is overrunning Italy. Scott Paget wants us to sail there rather than to Corsica, but they have a big disagreement over this. And he basically starts punishing the captain's son who is about 12 years old. He's a midshipman aboard the Defiant, but the captain insists that his son won't get any special treatment. So Scott Paget is using his authority to punish Captain Crawford's son as a way of getting back at him. So they engage in a battle. The Defiant engages a French ship, which they win the battle, and they're able to capture the French ship. But Captain Crawford is injured, leaving Scott Paget, the ruthless officer, in command. And then basically his ruthless rule pushes the sailors to launching the mutiny early. So what their plan was that all these ships would mutiny at the same time for better wages, and that they would all do this in unison to force the Admiralty's hand into giving into their demands. but the ship basically does it early, and they mutiny early. But then it's also discovered that in the battle against the French ship, they capture one of Napoleon's aides, and they discover that there's a French plan to invade England, and this really this kind of puts the mutineers at a crossroad, because on the one hand they're trying to mutiny for better wages. They want better conditions. They're sick of having to eat the shit rations. They're sick of the bad pay and the harsh punishments. But at the same time, they realize that, well, our country is about to be invaded, and these men are still patriotic. They still see it as their duty to defend England. So there's a radical sailor named Evans who murders Scott Paget, which the entire crew in response kill him, because it's vital to their mutiny succeeding that they don't that none of the officers are harmed. And eventually the Admiralty says that they will give in to the demands of the mutineers. They will improve the conditions and they will amnesty them. And the film ends with Crawford retaking command of the Defiant, and then he leads them into battle with the French, where they save the flagship of the Royal Navy, and they're commended for their actions by the Admiralty. So that's basically the plot of the film. It's not as much based on history as the other one. The ship is and the characters are fictional, but it is true that there were two different mutinies which took place in 1797, one of them being more moderate, one of them being more radical within the Royal Navy. So that's the backdrop of the film. So Morgoth, what did you think about
there was an actual ship called the Defiance, which did seem to go through all kinds of turmoil and mutinies, and funny enough, a little bit later, who was it that came along with the army and quelled the mutiny?
Our good friend
Captain Bligh. Captain Bligh came, so he survived the mutiny on the Bounty. I mean, God, it's tough being the sea captain in the British Navy. He survived his own. And then he went on. I mean, he was actually serving on a lot of ships after the mutiny. And one of the things that he did was there was a ship called the Defiance, which had its own mutiny, and he arrived with the army to put it down. Good old Bligh there till the bitter end. I mean, that's the kind of man that you want serving in your navy, like, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
What I'll say on the HMS Defiant though is the kind of the dynamic. Now, the captain is humane. He's more gentle, but the first officer is now in the role of the bastard. But I do think it's important because you can kind of compare and contrast both films. Well, I just don't think that Paget is in any way comparable to Bligh. He's purely vindictive. And there's a bit of you've got the idea where the working men who are literally, I mean, press ganged, just dragged off the docks and out of the pubs and onto the ship. And so much for English liberties. So you've got that. So you want to have a bit of sort of sympathy. At one point, one of them is literally made to eat like maggoty bread. That's one of it's quite a gross scene actually. But what's in, so you do have that kind of working class kind of but then proletariat sort of subtext there. But then another thing with Paget is that you discover that it isn't explained in much detail, but it is said that he's protected by very powerful and very rich. He comes from a very aristocratic family. So they've really painted it as like he is this kind of evil piece of shit who's protected on high, and he's kind of symbolic of the kind of cruelty of the British upper class toward the lower class, or just in general that they are just very unpleasant people, with Alec Guinness being more like a sort of gentle grandfather type figure in this. So it's not really. With Bligh, you can say, I've got a job to do and I need to carry it out. Paget doesn't have a leg to stand on for the way he conducts himself in this, as far as I can see, especially when you bring in to be honest, they're quite. I thought they were powerful scenes when he realizes that in order to get to the captain, he has to sort of hurt his son. And there's one scene where he pretends, oh, we've got a bit of woodworm in this room. I want you to come and have a look at it. So Alec Guinness goes in, and there's really nothing to look at. But what he's really done is made an excuse to bring him into a room where his son is being caned. And there's that look on his face because he can't say anything, because if he says something, he's going to be breaking protocol. He's going to be a father again and not a captain. And Paget knows it, and you can see the glee on his face. You can see that he's happy about what he's doing to the captain inside. I thought it was a very powerful scene, but it again, like he is just a shit. That I don't think there's any redeeming qualities about him in terms of like, well, you got to be cruel to be kind, or he's just got a job. There's not with Paget. He doesn't get that.
Oh yeah, like his character's absolutely despicable. And the thing is that like it's not even in service of the wider mission. It's like a personal vendetta that he has against Captain Crawford, and that's why he that's why he is being like a ruthless bastard. So yeah, I mean, definitely he's a much worse character than Captain Bligh in Mutiny on the Bounty, who you can even though he is portrayed as being kind of an asshole in that movie, perhaps more than he was in real life. There is still like some arguments for his side, whereas with Scott Paget, there's just none of that. He's just horrible. He's just horrible all around. And then there's even the scene where like what Alec Guinness does. So Captain Crawford is when they take over that French ship, he actually transfers. He transfers his son to the other ship. So when they got to put sailors on the French ship to sail it back to wherever they're going to sail it, he puts his son on that ship just to get him away from Scott Paget, because he knows that guy's basically using his son against him.
There's one part where, I mean, somebody in the chat pointed out, you probably wouldn't know who it is, but I think he's called Johnny Briggs. In both of these films, you see like stalwart British character actors pop up who you've been seeing in stuff all of your life, like people who went out to star in soap operas. And Mike Baldwin from Coronation Street has an early role in this. And there's a scene where Paget sort of catches him unaware, and he turns around and he's got his fists clenched because he doesn't know it's an officer. He doesn't know what's happening. It's more like a kind of reflex. And Paget sentences him to 6 dozen lashes. Like that, how like Bligh at peak would give 2 dozen. Bligh gives Richard Harris 2 dozen lashes, and that's portrayed as being savage. 6 dozen lashes would kill a man. There'd be nothing left of his back. It's completely ridiculous. But then, of course, Captain Crawford, Alec Guinness, like knocks it down to the 2 dozen lashes, which is like the minimum that he can give out.
Yeah, I mean,
I have just generally like watching these 2 movies. I've never seen like so many whippings. It was just they even had the same rack. Like I've never watched so many men get lashed. And when you look at it, when you look at the Cat of Nine Tails, it really was a horrible thing. Like it did. They've got like it isn't like they've got like little beads in it and like knots. They tied knots in the end of the rope and the leather and things, and it was intended to like lash you open.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, I think what was the phrase that they used? Like show them his backbone or something like that.
Yeah,
like, oh boy.
yeah. He says it. Yeah, like one more time, and I'm going to be looking at your backbone.
Oh no, like it really is like some brutal things. And not only that, but it's even protocol that when somebody is sentenced to be flogged like that, they actually have the entire ship, the entire crew has to line up and witness the punishment. So it's not even just that the guy's getting whipped. They have every single person aboard, all hands on deck, have to line up in like they're watching a show to watch this guy get flogged. And that's to remind the entire crew, this is what happens when you step out of line. This is what happens when you basically break the when you commit an infraction. Though I mean, obviously, in the case of someone like Scott Pageant, he took pleasure out of that. Like he was like a sick bastard, but no, like it was really brutal stuff. Like, and it was to get the idea home that to the rest of the crew, this is going to be you if you don't you're not if you don't follow the rules.
And Crawford gives the Paget a little speech because Crawford ends up being wounded, and Paget has to take over. And he knows that he's a monster. He knows he's going to be a tyrant, and he warns him and says, like, a happy crew is an efficient crew, and if you go easy on the men, you get a bit back from. So he in all fairness, I think the more interesting thing would be to contrast Crawford's ruling style to Bly's, because I don't think there was ever any. Well, the men were still planning to mutiny actually, but that was for wider kind of socio-political reasons and not through his rule in and of itself. I mean, where would you would rather have Crawford as your captain than Captain Bligh, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you definitely would. But again, I don't know whether or not he'd actually be the better captain, though. That is debatable because now, to be fair, like Captain Crawford's still the guy who was being punished. He didn't completely commute his sentence. He gave him 24 lashes, which that's still a pretty damn severe punishment. So it's not like he was adverse to any kind of discipline. But still, though, I mean, he was definitely a lot. He did seem like a lot softer of a leader, which, I might actually lean to. I mean, going back to what we spoke about earlier about, a lot of these sailors, they weren't the nicest guys in the world. I don't know. I think you might actually have to rule the way that Bligh did.
I mean, there is a at the beginning where they've press ganged a load of people in. One thing for Paget is that he knows that one of the men that they've just press ganged onto the ship, he is like a liar. He is a con artist because he says, "Oh well, I'm connected. My uncle is such and such in the Admiralty, and it's Sir what's his face and blah blah blah." And Paget goes on this whole thing about like what's his name, where does he live, and it's all lies. And he says, "I just made it all up. Like I know that you're a liar." And that he does. It is like that. I mean, the men in the HMS Defiant, I'd say they are like dodgier than the standard crew that's on the mutiny on the bounty.
Yeah, they're not saints themselves either. But like the other interesting aspect of this film is kind of that the battle between class consciousness and national consciousness. So basically, the sailors on the HMS Defiant in this movie have both class consciousness and national consciousness. So they see themselves kind of as the working class. They realize that they're in it together. They're all sailors, and they need to work together. Their struggle for better wages and conditions is collective. It can only succeed with cooperation, not only of all the sailors on board, but also the entire sailors throughout the entire fleet. So they're conscious of themselves as a class, as working class men. But they don't really consider the Admiralty themselves or all the officers like Crawford to be their enemies, though they do despise someone like Scott Pageant who abuses his power. And there's even a line where they said, like, in our business, Scott Pageant is our best friend because like he's what's going to get men to go along with this mutiny. So they definitely have class consciousness, but they also have a national consciousness, and that they have a patriotic love for their country. They understand that England is under threat, and it's their duty to defend it. And they even want to present their actions not as a mutiny, but as a protest. That they're not saying we're not saying we're revolutionaries. We're not saying that we want to overthrow the king or anything like that. We're just saying that we want better conditions, and we want this and that and the other from the Admiralty, and we're going to do this so that we can get better wages. But then when push comes to shove, and when they realize that England is in danger, the French want to invade. The guys even say like, well, I have a family, I have a home, and I'll be damned if the French, if there's Frenchmen waltzing through my house. There's even a scene where that there's a more radical sailor called Evans, and I have a bit more to say about him later. But one thing he says is that he says like this mutiny won't succeed unless we have Scott Paget's head on a pike, and he says like, well, to hell with England, who cares? Just let them have it. Let's go off to the Caribbean or something like that. And all the other sailors say, well, hell no. They're saying we have families, we have homes, and we're going to defend it. So ultimately, the national consciousness does win out.
Yeah, and it's even brought into more. It is like there is a kind of nudge and a wink towards if you think 1962, the Cold War, there is a bit of a nudge and a wink where it's as if they're saying, yeah, you may be sort of tempted to these ideas of socialism and whatnot, but remember that if you are Englishmen at the end of the day, like, because this has always been a weakness of Marxism. This is the sort of the standard narrative about how cultural Marxism came about. This is why, but like the Frenchman, because it's set before that, and it's set with the backdrop of the French Revolution. They get the French captain on, and they discover that he's the Napoleon. He's got these plans to invade England, but the Frenchman actually says to the crew when he realizes what's going on, like, your revolutionaries the same as us. Like, we've already done it. That's what we're fighting for. We're fighting against the same people as you. And what's interesting, of course, is that when you bring in people, the aristocrats, when you bring in the kind of the nobility, that's what the French have just offed them. And so that there is that kind of element there in the movie, kind of, I would say, subtly, but the dichotomy here. I mean, the first thing is, like, the French weren't really universalists at all. I mean, as any of the reactionaries would say, that was like when nationalism was born in a political sense. I think people get that mixed up, but like as a political force of nationalism, which the Juvenile gets into at great length. That's not to be sort of mixed up with ethnic kinship, which is, and that's what I've seen people do, where it's like, oh, so you're a nationalist. Well, that just means that, like, that was born in like the French Revolution or whatever, as a political force. And I know what they mean. What they mean is that the basically the people will all be sort of politicized. And so when you have the French Revolution, the state took on powers which were immensely more intrusive than what was under the king, because now everybody can get a rifle in their hand and get sent off to the front to fight, and the king was never able to do that because the other nobles would block it and say, well, we need these people to plow the land, we need to do that. Once you've kind of sidelined that, and then all you've got left is the state itself, the state apparatus, then all of a sudden it's got all of the population. And that's essentially how they were able to, France was able to fight against all of Europe for so long. But it's certainly not this kind of Marxist universalist kind of communism, the worldwide proletariat. To say that the English are revolutionaries the same as the French is kind of weak. It's kind of a bit of a weak cope, I think, because it didn't really catch on like that. The French Revolution was something quite specific to France and its makeup, and I mean, it's going off on a bit of a tangent, but one of the reasons why the English were so opposed to it was because they didn't want it spreading into the British Isles.
Well, I mean, but also just remember that, like, the French captain, while he says he's a revolutionary like the sailors, they're still trying to invade, though. Like, so it's not like it's not like the French don't have an idea of their own interests in mind. Like, they are still trying. Like, maybe they're saying that they're invading to bring liberty, but at the end of the day, they are still invading. I find this theme in the film really interesting, and then that it was made during the Cold War. I think it does kind of echo that, because the ideology of Marxism basically says that nationality is a bourgeoisie construct to prevent the proletariat from uniting worldwide and overthrowing them. Like, this is utter nonsense. Like, national identity. I mean, what the first half of the 20th century will show is that actually superseded the class identity. People at the end, the working class at the end of the day, they still loved their countries, they still loved their homes, they still had families and things. I think that, like, one of the, and I was actually I just thought about this today, but I think, like, one of the biggest ironies of Marxism is this, that the working class, I find that they're a lot more motivated by things that are tangible. What are some things that are tangible? Better wages. Getting better wages is tangible. Getting better working conditions, that's something tangible. Another thing that's tangible is your country, your community, your family. These are real things. Whereas the middle class seems to be the ones who really get into ideas and into values, and they're the ones who tend to be the idealists. I don't know if the working class is motivated by equality. Because somebody can get better wages and still not be equal to they can still not be equal to somebody above them on the hierarchy, but ultimately they are tangibly better off. Whereas, like, the idea of equality, like, as a value, does seem like a much more of a middle class idea. And I think this is why, all the boomer I know it's kind of a boomer meme, but it is kind of true that Marxism, 100 years ago and today, is very much a middle class phenomenon, because they're the ones who are really, like, interested in these ideas. There's the memes that the only people who are Marxists are, like, some college students, upper middle class college students who have had a couple one too many critical theory classes at their university. But there's a reason for that, and I said, like, the 20th century really did kind of prove that part of Marxism wrong. And I think that's why, we got what we call cultural Marxism later on. It's because they really needed to break the, not that I want to make this stream entirely about that. The people who wanted to push it needed to break the bonds which were of race and nationality and ethnicity, which were a lot stronger.
Yeah, because they expected, in World War One, like, all the ingredients for revolution were there in World War One. In fact, World War One should never have happened in the way it did. And it kind of makes sense that the shipbuilder or the farmer or the coal miner from Sunderland has more materially, you see, from the kind of Marxist perspective, materially, he has more in common with the farmer or the shipbuilder or the coal miner from Germany or France. Like, they have more in common with each other than what they do with their masters, if you like. And so, therefore, it seems logical that they would all that they would all turn their guns on their leaders and establish socialism. And of course, that never happened except in Russia. But even there, it was, well, that's a whole different story. But that wasn't sort of organic either. And so what that did was, like, kind of shocked a lot of the Marxist thinkers, because it had gone wrong. And then you get Gramsci, and Gramsci's like, the problem is home. The problem is roots. And this takes us all the way back to the movie here, because what you see happening is that it's like they can have this kind of revolution where it's kind of takes it. They're using the hierarchy on the ship as a stand-in for society in general. And in the end, it's like, well, yeah, you can do that, but you'll no longer have a country. You're going to have to choose the revolution, the revolt for your own gain and end up without a nation, or you will have to. England is still there. This is the problem facing the Anthony Quayle's character towards the end, where he wants to make a stand and he wants to head off, but he will be betraying his homeland. And what's in that is that's not to say that he wanted to do it for Queen and country, maybe, but not for the politicians or the bureaucrats or the businessmen. at the end of the day, it would be for the village church, family, pub, the sons, daughters, mothers, just this kind of this association with homeland, and that will trump the kind of the ideal of the revolution every time. And that's kind of like what's, in a way, it's been a curse to the English, because they just seem to have forgotten to have revolt at all, you know. But that's a kind of different story for a different stream.
So the other thing that's interesting is, this character of Evans. So he's basically another ordinary sailor, but he's more radical than the other ones. So basically, he wants Scott Paget dead. He hates his guts, and he even goes so far as to say that he doesn't care if he can never go back to England. They should sail off to the Caribbean and live as pirates. It's just like he wants out of this. And the other sailors rebuke that. So there's a part where basically the message to which Alec Guinness, Captain Crawford, gives to his men is that they will all be amnestied on the condition that none of the officers are harmed, and that the Admiralty has agreed to their terms. And basically that's not good enough for Evans, because he's just out for blood, and he murders Scott Paget. And then I forget what the other sailor's name was, like the leader of the mutiny. Basically, he kills Evans because he had just what he was going to do was basically just ruin the entire mutiny for everyone. And I kind of thought of like the as I don't know. So from in the perspective of a mutiny, is like some protesters and sailors protesting for better wages and conditions in the 18th century, and kind of contrasted that with today. The moderate reformer or the radical. So the people, they both of them want change. They're both disaffected with how the system works, but they have a very different way of going about it. And I think that this actually really does apply to a lot of people in our kind of sphere of the internet, really, as well today. That there's the people who are who try to have social acceptability, that they want to package the message in a way that it doesn't offend people, in a way that you can still be a acceptable member of society, but pushing ideas which run contrary to the zeitgeist, and you're pushing back in that way. And then you contrast that with say some Telegram chat group, and it's just like, well, we need to hang this person, we need to hang that person. And when you look at this, I really do think that the moderate one is it seems like it's much better. It seems like it's much more effective, and kind of in all these political movements, like the ability to actually remain a functional and acceptable member of society is a lot more valuable than being some ideological spurg.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets of their take on crime and punishment, which was sort of became a kind of something of a thing of discussion recently, isn't it? Where basically the isolated ideologue ends up, I think it becomes a form of nihilism, because in the movie we're discussing now, he's kind of like, well, I don't care if I hang. I want my pound of flesh. I want Paget's head on a pike, even if it means the end of me. And I just think, well, that's not healthy for anybody, really.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you see that with a lot of people, on our side of the internet, like they'll say, well, the normies are all just they're all just, and I think we actually talked about this with the in the Watchmen stream as well. Like the normies, they're all just brainwashed idiots with their NPC opinions, and they're just waltzing towards destruction, and well, they get what they deserve. But then ultimately, if you're somebody who believes in the well-being of your people, well, that is who you're those are the people that you are trying to save. And I know that they have their NPC opinions, but in many ways they do bring good things into your life. It's good to have people in your life who are not political, and ultimately, like, maintaining that kind of kinship with them, not an ideological one, but one on a much deeper level, actually being able to have that. That's really what you're fighting for. And, regardless of whether or not they're NPCs or not, there is value in that. And, the nihilist who basically just says, well, I don't care. I just want it all to burn. This person is really kind of just leading whatever movement they're part of towards destruction.
Yeah. And when they do reach that destruction, nobody will even notice. Like it'll become like this big disaster, which people will notice. But by and large, I mean, do we really want where all of the normies are politicized? Like, would it matter? I don't know. That's getting into that's taking us far away from a movie about British Navy and shit and whatnot. Like, but I mean, one just to get back to sort of basics a little bit. I do think of the two movies that Mutiny on the Bounty, it did look better than HMS Defiant. I think you really see the slickness of a Hollywood production against a kind of like a solid old Brit kind of warship of a movie. You really get those beautiful sunsets and things and Mutiny on the Bounty, which I like. You get that a lot in the Anthony Hopkins one as well. I mean, another one, because this, just to sort of broaden it out as we head into the kind of late stage of the stream, this whole genre of movie is like great. I mean, one of the ones people always ask us to do is Marshland Commander with Russell Crowe. And there's a scene in that where it's got Vaughan Williams. There's a Vaughan Williams piece on it, which I forgot. I think I forgot the name of it. Somebody in the chat will know. But it's got them, and they're just just floating, they're just like sailing across the water, and it's got this just beautiful sunset going down in the background, and it just looks great. But I would also say the Russell Crowe's Captain Jack Aubrey, he seems to get it exactly right of like how much authority, how much sort of empathy, having respect for his lads, and all of that kind of thing. I think he gets it just right. And there's a scene in that where they're all sitting at the table, and he tells a story about how he met Captain Nelson, and they're having a drink, and he's a bit drunk, and he's able to ooze authority without being a tyrant, and to make jokes without coming across sort of with, as being too light and a bit of a clown. I think that's a perfect example of a good captain. If anything, he might have been a little bit too young in that role. That's based. There's actually about 20 novels of Captain Jack Aubrey, and then his first officer. Or no, it's his friend who's like science officer or something. And they go all the way through it. I mean, I'm not sure what Russell Crowe's up to these days. They don't seem to make movies with masculine white men in them anymore. But if they did, I would like to see Russell Crowe return to that role, to be honest.
Oh yeah, that's another great movie. I don't know. Maybe since I was in the mood for naval adventures. I actually watched that movie last night after having watched the two that we're reviewing today earlier in the week. But I don't know, that one might be for a future stream. So let's not get too much into Master and Commander. But that is an excellent movie too.
I would also on this similar theme, The Fear, I thought was good. Even though people say, did you watch The Fear?
No, I haven't seen that one.
That's actually got Richard Harris's son in, who was also in Chernobyl, and that's great as well. But people, I mean, I recommended it to my dad, and he'd watched it, and it's two ships. Once again, it's the British Navy, and they go up to find the Northwest Passage across the top of Canada, and they get stuck in the ice. And basically they're there for the ice doesn't thaw, and they end up being there for like 3 years or something. But there's also a weird side story where the local Eskimos have put a curse on them, or there is a curse on them, and it comes across like a giant demonic polar bear, which keeps popping up and killing them. But they eventually they have their own rebellion and mutiny, and it turns out that one half of the crew are still strong and fit, and the other half are becoming really weak. And this is because like they've turned to cannibalism basically, and it's like the cannibals are still in pretty good nick, whereas the other ones, there's lead in the tins of the food, and it's slowly poisoning them. So if you can leave, that's actually that's a good one, despite the weird monster polar bear thing. And then the other one that I'd recommend is a great Colin Farrell thing, which was from recent years, and that was called The North Water. I'm not that one seems to be mainly an Irish affair, I think. I think that one's kind of mixed. There's people from all over. They set off from Newfoundland, I think. But there's some other suggestions on this. The sort of the genre of brutal, salty sea dog adventures.
And we're headed towards the end, but I wanted to tell a story because I don't know when else I'll have the chance to talk about this, about the Navy. So my grandfather was in the Canadian Navy. He was in it twice when he was a young guy, 18, 19 years old during World War II. He served aboard a ship in the Canadian Navy. And then after his the war, after going to university, he went back to the Navy as a medical officer because my grandfather was a doctor. He went to medical school, and then after he finished that, he became a medical officer in the Canadian Navy. And he has this mug. I don't have it with me here, but it's back in Canada. I have the mug, and it has his name on it. And it's this kind of like this like tin mug. And the bottom of it is glass, though. So the mug is like tin. It's not see-through, but then just the bottom of it is. And the story that I was told about that is that they had this tradition in the Royal Navy in the 18th century where when they needed to press, they had the press gangs going around trying to get guys to join. It was obviously not easy to get people to enlist in the Navy. So they had a tradition where they had a law that if you accepted money from the crown, then they could enlist you in the Navy. And just by touching a coin, you had accepted it. So what they do is they go into a pub. They'd offer some guy would come up to you and say, "Oh, let me buy you a drink, man." And then he'd put a coin in the bottom of the beer glass. And once you drink the beer, the coin falls in your mouth. You've touched the coin. You've accepted money from the crown, and they can enlist you in the Navy. And at least the story goes that they started to make the bottoms of the mugs transparent so that you can look into the mug. If someone buys you a mug, a pint of beer in a pub, you look in, you see if you see a coin in the bottom of that mug, then you run because they're trying to enlist you.
I mean, that's a sign it's a bad job. If we've got to go to that length, that would be me. That would happen to me. I mean, I'd be sticking my fingers into the paint and fishing around to see if there was a coin in the bottom.
Well, you can't do that because if you've touched it, then you've accepted it.
It's a dirty trick, isn't it?
Yeah.
I will say Travis is right. It's not called the fear; it's called the terror. And on that, I'll tell you the greatest missed opportunity that we're never going to see on this subject is, and it breaks your heart about why we don't have our own film industry, is that with the technology they've got now, the special effects and everything, imagine how awesome of a Moby Dick movie they could make. And I really mean like where it's like 3.5 hours long. I think Peter Jackson would be good to direct it, actually. Like, imagine if you had, obviously, you could do a CGI Moby Dick, like making it good. And then you could have Daniel Day-Lewis as Captain Ahab. And the reason why I say it could be 3.5 hours long is because if anybody's actually read Moby Dick, like it really is, I'd say it's about 20% storyline and 80% sort of useless information and lore about the seas, about legends of the seas, details of whaling, obscure history of whaling ships and like mysteries of the deep, all of this, and then you'll get pages and chapters of that, and then you'll go back to like Captain Ahab sort of ruminating about death, looking out of the window, and it's just one of the greatest books ever written. But it's so sad because the Gregory Peck Moby Dick is great. Maybe we can cover it sometime, but it will be such a, what we should be making in movies these days, or like a giant 3.5 hour epic, like no holds barred Moby Dick, which is pitched to a high IQ sort of white male audience, where yes, you do get all of the lore, you do get these tangents of obscure knowledge of whaling ships and all of that. And what do we get instead? Like all that Cape shit stuff. Like Ant-Man versus Spider-Man or whatever the hell they're making now.
Yeah, well, unfortunately,
it's so sad.
Oh, it is sad. Yeah, and unfortunately, even today, like I don't think there's a large enough audience to even make that kind of film profitable. So, the sad thing is that like they have to dumb it down to the lowest common denominator with these like $300 million movies to even turn a profit. But anyway, so I guess just a question for to end the stream on, which one did you like better, Mutiny on the Bounty or HMS Defiant?
Mutiny on the Bounty.
Okay, I'd say I agree with that. I think that it was a bit more of an epic film. It was longer. It did feel like more of an adventure, and yes, it's just definitely a lot more aesthetically pleasing. But I do like the film HMS Defiant as well. It is a solid.
I liked it because I liked seeing all those British actors: Alec Guinness, Anthony Quayle. I mean, it seemed like half the cast were out of Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, well, I mean, Alec Guinness, he's become a mainstay on classic movies too, hasn't he? Just up there with Charlton Heston.
How many Alec Guinness have we done?
We've done Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, HMS Defiant, and have we done any more? At least 3.
That's up there. That's up there with Charlton. How many Charlton have we done? 3 or 4?
We did Planet of the Apes, Soylent Green, 55 Days at Peking. We might have done one more. So we've at least 3. So yeah. Well, anyway.
So the classic movies we've done. Wow, to be fair, we've done 3 Clint Eastwood as well.
Yes, Dirty Harry, and then the 2
Clint Eastwood, Charlton Heston, and Alec Guinness are like the top stars of the classic movie series.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I liked HMS Defiant. I'd say Alec Guinness is one of my favorite actors, and it is just like a great, solid historical film. Great themes in there. But Mutiny on the Bounty is a bit more epic of a film. It is a bit better made. But it does have a few points against it. I kind of wish that they had shown more of Captain Bligh's journey, but then again, it is already a 3-hour movie. But I don't know. So one guy I know, he doesn't have a big channel, but he makes some good content. I've listened to him a few times. His name is 99 Iron Duke. Well, he was basically he's a good guy. Check out his content. He was screaming in the chat the entire time, like, "Oh, this movie was like slandering Captain Bligh. He was a great man." So I just wanted to end it by saying that I concur. Captain Bligh was a great man. He was a great sailor, a great officer, and well, let's all remember our good friend Captain Bligh, and let's dedicate this stream to him. Yeah. So, anyway, any last words before we finish?
No, that's me pretty done before I go off on another tangent about what more sort of salty, fishy, waterlogged movies that I'd like to see made.
Well, you can never go wrong with the genre, just get a beer and on a Saturday, Friday night, and well, there's nothing better than that. All right.
Grog, whips, mutinies.
Yep. What more can you ask for? All right. So everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
All right. See you later, folks.